everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of the PhD Life Coach. The last couple of weeks, we've been thinking about managing supervisory relationships, and I'm kind of building on that this week too. And so this week, we are going to think about why I want to coach your boss and what that means for you. We make tons of assumptions about people that are in senior positions to you. So if you're a PhD student, I want you to think about your supervisors, senior collaborators, maybe your postgrad lead, any of those sorts of people that have kind of direct responsibility for you. And if you're an academic listening to this, I want you to think about the people above you, whether that's your head of department, head of school, your research group lead, if you're a postdoc maybe, all the way up to your vice chancellor, the people that are in charge of your entire institutions. I just want you to take a second and reflect. What thoughts do I have about those people? Now, you might have positive thoughts, you might have negative thoughts, you might have a combination of the two. I think this is a particularly timely moment to think about this stuff, as in the UK at least, there are a lot of strikes and disputes to do with pay and pensions and decisions that senior leaders make on behalf of other academics. Emotions are running really high, and understandably so. They're really complex issues, and we all want what's best for the sector, and we want to feel recognized, and we want to have secured jobs, and to not have to give up the rest of our lives, as it sometimes feels, to succeed and to do the work that we want to do. And when we're in these kind of intense environments, it's really easy to look at the people above us and tell a whole bunch of stories about that, because often we separate ourselves from the humanity of those people. And this isn't going to be a please think of the vice chancellors sort of a podcast. That's not what I mean at all. But some of the assumptions that we make are that they are operating from their best selves. That if they make decisions about workload, about pay, about all of these important things, that they are doing that with care and thought and attention and sufficient time to think things through and no emotions and absolutely logical best selves. And that's simply not the case. All senior leaders are also under pressure. They're also fatigued. They're also working too many long hours. Now, it may feel very different from somebody who is struggling to bring home enough money to be able to support their family or support themselves. Absolutely take that. But often we assume they have bad intention. We assume they're coming at this from their best selves and they think they've made all the right decisions. And we assume that they are disregarding our views or don't care about our views, don't value us, don't think about us at all. And what I found fascinating through my journey through academia, so as many of you all know, I started as an undergrad, finished as a professor in the same university, is people think this about the people at every single level. So when I was a PhD student and people had supervisors that weren't great, the PhD students we assumed that our supervisor was deprioritizing us, that they didn't care, that they thought we weren't important or whatever it is. And then when we got to be supervisors, we realized that sometimes we don't reply to our PhD students because we've just lost track of our emails and there's 4,000 things to do and we're teaching this week and we're marking this week and we're doing everything else. And so we kind of cut ourselves some slack, but then we think that our program leads or our senior colleagues, but they've got it together. And so when they make decisions about where money goes in the lab, for example, that's because they don't value my research and they don't think I'm a good teacher and they don't think I'm ready for promotion and all of these things. And then we become those roles and we're program leads and we're research leads and things like that. And we realize, oh my goodness, I just made a decision about that budget. I've never been taught anything about budgets. I just made a decision about that budget based on the things I could think of at the time and with the amount of time I had to consult. But I don't know if it was the right thing to do or not. And now everyone's yelling at me. I did my best, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know. We're thinking those things. And we're like, no, but there's more to this story. I didn't have enough time to consult. People above me were putting me under pressure. I had to just pick, and I can't fund everything. You know, what do I do? But we think the people above us, but the head of school should have given me more time. The head of school should have given me a bigger budget, and then I wouldn't have to prioritize like this. And then we become head of school. Thank goodness, never did that. But we become head of school. Lots of friends who did. And we realize, actually, we still got people above us putting us under pressure, putting us under time pressure, and forcing us to make decisions that weren't necessarily decisions that we either had time to fully think through or even fully endorse, but we had to kind of take them in our name because that collective responsibility is part of leadership. And where I saw this more than any other time was when I was doing leadership training through the university. So I did a whole variety of different levels of leadership training, and that brought me into contact with a whole load of academics at lots of different levels of seniority as I progressed through with them. So these were my peers at any one time. And whenever I talked to them, they were genuinely all wonderful people. You know, you think that you're going to reach a stage where you meet the knobhead leaders, and I actually didn't. Very rarely. The vast majority of the time, these people had reached the next stage of leadership, believing that they could do better than the last people because they had everyone's best interests at heart, and they were going to work hard and consult and make sure everyone knew what was going on, and they're going to make a difference. And then they got there and realized that they are the same old human beings that they were 10 years ago, and that actually there's so much to do and so much time that you don't get to bring your best self to every level. And at every level, I saw people, and I felt myself being someone who wanted some grace from the people behind me. I wanted people who I was giving these decisions to understand that, you know, I was doing my best here within the constraints, but the people above me, I still thought should be doing their jobs better than they were. And then you get there and you're like, yeah, it's not that easy, is it? And the reason this is so important is because we forget that at every stage of seniority, we're there with the same human brain. We're there with our thoughts, which are complicated and messy. We're there with our emotions, which sometimes help and sometimes don't. We have the time pressure. We have all of those things running through our heads. And we have to learn that lesson. Wherever you go, there you are. And at every level, we're still human beings. And I think we expect ourselves to be different, that when we're in those leadership positions, or people that reach those leadership positions should be more on top of it by then. They should have more clarity of thought. They should have the time and space to consult. When we get there, we will. It's similar with my clients, where I could coach across all levels of seniority. So from PhD students through to full professors. And at every level, I have people who worry about their confidence. I have people who worry they're going to get found out, that they're not sure they're doing the right thing. And it just makes me realize that you can get whatever badges you want. You can get promoted to any level. You can get awards and grants and papers and citations and all these metrics that we think will make us feel better when we get them. And you don't necessarily feel better. There is a very good chance that the people who are directly senior to you worry about their performance as much as you do. There's a very good chance that the people who are senior to you feel just as overwhelmed and incapable as you do sometimes. There is a very good chance they procrastinate. There's a very good chance they regret snapping at you last week, but they only did it because they were exhausted and their child's sick and they haven't written the paper that they were meant to have written. They have no idea when they're going to do it. So they snapped at you. And again, this isn't making excuses. This isn't saying that any of these things are okay, but it's saying that everybody at every level of academia needs coaching and needs to understand how their thoughts and feelings influence their actions. Now, some of you will say that when you become senior at university, you have access to coaching, and that is true to an extent. So many senior leaders will have access to some coaching, and sometimes that can be really useful. In my experience, there are many wonderful coaches working at universities, but often the style of coaching is focused on what am I going to do next? What are the pros, cons? Why would I do this? Why would I do that? Okay, let's go. We'll do this. And then accountability coaching from there. And what I experienced much less of was coaching that really focused on the thoughts you're having and the emotions you're experiencing and what impact that has on your behaviors. And that's where I love the training that I've been through with the Life Coach School, where we really treat ourselves as rounded human beings whose thoughts and emotions dictate the actions that we take. So I want to coach your bosses, your supervisors, your heads of school, your vice chancellors, because I know that when they're having thoughts like, there's too much to do, there's not enough funding for this, I don't know what I'm doing, I've never done a budget before, everyone's going to hate me when I introduce this, but I think I've got to. When they're having those thoughts, they are feeling emotions like overwhelm and guilt and shame and hurriedness and hopelessness and all sorts of emotions that do not lead to them taking actions that are coming from their best selves. And the problem with other people's actions is they create our circumstances. They become the things that happen to us. Now, with coaching, with support, with mind management, we can choose what we think about those environments. We can choose what we think about other people's behavior and therefore how we feel. It's not that their behaviors inherently dictate our responses. We get to pick, but we all know it's a lot easier to pick nice thoughts and to pick positive thoughts if you're in an environment that feels like you're being supported and understood. And so when we're surrounded by people that are taking actions from shame and guilt and hurriedness and hopelessness, we've got a whole lot more mind management to happen because they're taking all these actions that are not necessarily helpful. When we come at a challenging situation, feeling overwhelmed, stressed, upset, tired, then we tend to make decisions to try and make those things go away. Now, sometimes that can be really fast decisions. So if it feels really uncomfortable to stay with a difficult decision, then sometimes we just make a snap decision and make it go away. And a snap decision isn't necessarily always the right decision. We sometimes make decisions for the wrong reasons. We tell ourselves we have to only focus on the facts and we have to take emotions out of it. That's some people's coping strategy. But that doesn't take into account the fact that you're managing human beings who have thoughts and emotions, whether you like it or not. Other people try and guess and preempt what other people's thoughts and emotions are and try and do things to fit in with that and to try and make them feel good, when actually we can't make other people feel good. Only their thoughts can make them feel good. And we don't have responsibility for everybody else's thoughts and feelings. And if you've been in a leadership position, you know, if you try and make decisions so that you're popular with everybody, that's going to cause its own problems too. So these leaders with their human brains are not making their best decisions. Another thing that people do in this situation is they generalize from their own experience. So when you don't have time to fully think everything through, you assume that people have a similar experience to you. Some of you may have experienced this where you've gone to somebody senior for advice or for mentorship, and they've said, what you need to do is this, this, and this. And you're like, oh, hang on, that doesn't feel right to me. That doesn't feel like something that's possible at the moment. We see it a lot in academia at the moment where senior colleagues will say to PhD students, oh, as long as you've got maybe one publication when you go for a job, you'll get a permanent job on that. That's cool. Not looking at the fact that they got their permanent jobs 30 years ago. And right now, the people who are applying for permanent jobs have far more qualifications than that person did when they were applying for these junior roles. So not taking the time to think about how things have changed, not taking the time to think how somebody's route might be different. So I spent the last 7-ish years of my academic career as a teaching focused member of staff with an emphasis on teaching leadership. And I had many people saying to me, what you need to do is you need to get your head down, you need to produce research papers and so on. I'm like, no, but that's not the career trajectory I'm on. That's not what I want to do. But they couldn't generalize beyond their own experience, because generalizing your own experience is the easiest thing to do. And they were busy and they had like 10 minutes to give me advice and they were thinking of 14 different things. And so the first thing that jumps into their head is, oh, I did it like this, it worked. Yeah, kind of do it like that. That sounds good. And then we're like, oh my God, they don't understand, or maybe I'm wrong. But actually, they just didn't have that much time to think about what they were saying to you. I think we also underestimate how fragile people in leadership can feel sometimes. One of the weird things with academia is most admin roles, you kind of promote through your peers to get into them. And suddenly you're head of school and you're line manager for a whole bunch of people that last week you were peers. 2 years ago, you were all at the same level. 10 years ago, you were students together, whatever it might be. And suddenly now you're in this leadership position and you can't talk to them about it anymore. That's a weird feeling. That's a fragile feeling. Leadership is challenging. And when we can't bring our best selves to that, we don't make the best decisions and we change other people's circumstances. We change other people's experiences. And it cascades down. I want you to think about the last time you were tired and hopeless and overwhelmed and all of these things. And I want you to think of people that are junior to you. And whatever stage you're at in your academic career, there are people who are junior to you. If you're a final year PhD student, you have people that are further down the PhD ladder than you. So the newbie first years, perhaps. If you're a newbie first year, there are master's students working in your department. There are undergraduate students. You might have children. You might have other people who are in your life who you have some sort of influence over. When you were tired, when you were overwhelmed, did you snap at them? Did you turn up as your best self and like carefully talk through the different options of what they might do? Or did you just tell them what to do and then regret afterwards that you sounded so grumpy? I bet you did, because it cascades down. When we have people above us who are feeling all of these emotions, taking actions they don't necessarily believe in themselves, and then we experience those actions, we then, if we don't learn how to manage our minds, we then have thoughts like, oh, well, they don't care about me. Maybe I'm not good enough to be here. Maybe this is just a toxic environment. We get grumpy, we get upset, we get overwhelmed, and then we take actions that create somebody else's circumstance. Sometimes in departments, it goes around in circles. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of you who've walked into a room with colleagues, not feeling too bad, and then this colleague moans about that, and that colleague ignores you, and that colleague gets stroppy about something else. And you leave there going, oh my God. And then you're in a bad mood. So next time you walk into a room, you create that environment for somebody else. And sometimes one or two people will step out of that and they'll get coaching and they'll learn to manage their minds and to explore their thoughts and the influences of those thoughts and learn how to choose different thoughts. And that's what I help people with. And I help people at the very bottom of this pyramid a lot of the time, the grad students who are on the receiving end of lots of this. And we can make amazing progress to help grad students, help PhD students to interpret things a little bit differently and to look after themselves and look after their minds while they're managing this. But I want to coach the people above you too, because it will help them. It will help their interpretations of the people above them, but it will help the PhD students too. When we start to coach at every level, that's when we can start to change entire environments. Because it shouldn't be your responsibility to survive and be resilient in a toxic environment. It should be the university's responsibility and everybody in its responsibility to target every single bit of it, so that your senior leaders are getting the support that they need, so that they can make decisions from their best selves, so they can show up the way they intended to, not the way that they ended up showing up just because they're tired and stressed and overwhelmed. So why have I done a podcast on this? Well, several reasons. First one is I think you should tell your supervisors and your heads of school and your vice chancellors all about this podcast, and you should suggest they listen to this one. And I would love to help as many of them as I can. I also made it, though, because having some insight into the humanity of your leaders can really help you with the thoughts that you choose to have about the situation. And this is not to excuse bad behavior. I've touched on that in my last 2 episodes where we talked about improving supervisory relationships, managing toxic supervisory relationships. This is not about saying it's okay to behave badly. This is about accepting that the stories that we tell ourselves, that they intended this, and this means something about us and it means something about them, may not, often won't be the full story. Having a little understanding of that can just take some of the heat out of what you're thinking about it. That's not to say you shouldn't disagree. That's not to say you shouldn't campaign against things. That's not to say you shouldn't strike. All of these things, you can absolutely believe that they have made the wrong decision. And in many cases, they probably have. But you can simultaneously believe that they made the wrong decision because they're a human being who was in particular circumstances, who thought certain thoughts, had emotions, and took actions that were probably not their optimal actions. They're probably not the best thing that they could have done. You can believe it was misguided. You can believe that it should be changed without believing that they were inherently evil and intentional in those actions. And in doing so, we can try and figure out how we make this entire environment a little bit less angry and a little bit less stressful and a little bit less overwhelmed. We can also be a little bit less self-righteous about it. I spent a lot of time, as some people listening to this might remember, as a junior member of staff, talking about how I would do it when I was in charge. Saying, we'll do this, it'll be so much better, we'll make sure everybody feels included, we'll do this, we'll do that. Did I? To some extent. In some of the things I did. Did I all the time? No, absolutely not. Because I was not my best self all the time. There were times when I was thinking thoughts that did not help, that led to me to make decisions that were not the best decisions and that other people didn't like. I didn't always show up as my best self. Despite all the optimism of mid-20s Vicky, who thought that if only she was in charge, the world would be a better place. We're all human beings. We all deserve a bit more compassion. Let's criticize the decisions that are made, but have understanding for where they might have come from. And let's try and ensure that as many people as possible have access to high quality coaching so that we can make our little corner of the world a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more curious, and a whole lot less overwhelming. I'm really interested to hear what people make of this episode. So make sure you're following me on Twitter at Dr. Vicky Burns. Let me know your thoughts and have a wonderful week.